But I knew I had to give myself over. That's the other thought. I knew I had to just let go, and I did.
Yeah. Was there then bliss thereafter?
There was terror and bliss. It was this weird combination. It was just bright, there was this bright light. It was sort of this singularity. And just, there was three things: bright light, no self, no Christof, no memories, no thought, no future, no past, no time, no space, no fear. There was just terror and ecstasy. With this modern renaissance, there were so many people, and then I got curious. I wanted to experience 5-MeO DMT, which is this very, this near-death experiences. And because I said, well, A, I'm just curious, but B, also, if I claim to be a student of consciousness, and here we have a technique that can rapidly and dramatically and sometimes transformatively change your experience of the world, well, then I for sure want to experience it.
Yeah.
Because, the motto of the Royal Society is nullius in verba. Take no one's word for it. And for consciousness, I want to see the data. Right? Show me the data. Now, for consciousness, it's not just I want to hear your account, but that's the difference between studying black holes or viruses or brains and studying consciousness. Ultimately, I can only directly experience this.
Yeah.
So I wanted to directly experience this. There's no Turing test for consciousness. So the problem of consciousness is not just what most people think, oh, you have to explain how anything can be conscious. That is a problem. But then you also have to explain in each case why is the particular conscious experience the way it is.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Whether I'm on mushroom or angry, these are different experiences, and you have to explain how I can have different experiences.
Yeah.
Consciousness may be much more widespread than we think.
Yeah.
That even very simple system, very, very simple system, so for example a bacteria, a single cell bacteria, may already feel like something. Now what does it mean? A single cell bacteria has already, let's say, 10 million proteins of 1,000 different types. No one has ever simulated, there's people who attempt to simulate single bacteria, but no one has ever done it completely because we can't do it right now. It's already of vast complexity. It's very specific.
And a larger consciousness, as you said earlier, would wipe out if we, the two of us, connect, and it becomes this new maximum integrated information, it will wipe out our conscious experience.
Correct. Suddenly the complexity, this fine measure of our integrated brain, will exceed that of my brain by itself and of your brain by itself. At that point, what will happen? Hans, gone. Christof, gone. Instead, there will be this new Ubermind, this new amalgamation of Hans and Christof that'll see out of 4 eyes, that'll have 2 mouths, 4 limbs, etc. Then I am the world, because then I experience the world and me as being identical.
Did you have that experience?
Yes, I did. And I somehow tapped into, I experienced tapping into having this, I'm the universe. I know it sounds trite and it sounds, but
no, to me it does not. To me, it definitely does not. I've been there in sort of that way, but it's just the shock, but that's to me the shock, what to make of it, right? Because that experience is so real, and when you get out of it, it was sort of your mind on drugs, and then again, for me at least, sort of the old narrative kicks in again. You also say the dictum, no brain, never mind, right? Or brain, never mind. So
no brain, never mind.
Yeah, exactly. And then that narrative starts again, and then when it fades. But it's so real, right? And what sort of a question for you is, because you understand the brain, you understand consciousness, you have spent your whole career theorizing about this. How do you theorize about this experience? What can you make of it?
Well, so I was totally perplexed, completely perplexed for several days. I called up my very good friend Giulio Tononi, who's the person who started integrated information, the chief architect of integrated information theory, just to try to make some sense of it. He tried to bring me down by saying, well, do you believe it was your brain that caused it? I said, well, yeah, it's something I did take, I participated in this ceremony. If you've done it, they take like 10 hours, 12 hours, and you chant, you dance, and you partake of Santa Daime. I know all of that. So in my normal moments, I say, yeah, it was my brain on when you have this very powerful, psychologically very powerful ceremony, that puts you in this very powerful expectancy effect and this group effect, and then you take the ayahuasca brew, and in a combination of that, my brain. So the conservative interpretation is, what it shows that brains are capable of having extraordinary experiences.
Yeah.
Okay, and now I've had this myself. It's not only that I read about other people having it, but I know now firsthand that brains are capable of this experience. Now, but maybe, and this is where the ontological shock comes in, maybe this is really the black swan, right? All it takes is one black swan to wonder, well, maybe there's something fundamentally wrong with this point of view. And so I was trying to make sense of it. I read, I had Schopenhauer with me. I read Schopenhauer again, and he makes this beautiful comment about, when in this what I think he called the aesthetic moment, when the person merges, the apprehender merges with the apprehender, when the knower merges with the knowing, you become a pure, will-less subject, and that's exactly what I had. And then I was looking around, and then I came upon the writings of Bernardo Kastrup, the analytic philosopher, and was really, read his book and was really tantalized by that. So now I'm in this in-between state from a metaphysical point of view, where because I study the brain, the nice thing with the brain, you can take it and you can put electrodes in it, whether it's a human or animal brain. You can record it, you can poke it, you can stimulate it, and there are lawful relationships between this brain and conscious experience. Like if you stimulate my back here, in most cases, you'll get visual experiences. And if I lose bits of this visual brain because of stroke or gunshot, whatever, I will have loss of visual experience. So by some measure, there's these very lawful relationships between brains. So doesn't this imply that ultimately it's all a product of the brain substrate? Well, yeah, it seems to be true, but then I had this experience. So how do I explain that? Is it really true that there is a universal mind? So why don't I experience right now? There are all sorts of confusions about IIT, partly because IIT is it's a non-trivial theory. I can't just explain it, like saying, well, it's quantum mechanics or something like that. So it's a very non-trivial theory. It has certain axioms, certain assumptions which one has to understand, and it has interesting, powerful implications. So it's not easy to understand. So that means that lots of people misunderstand it in all sorts of expected and always surprising, very unexpected ways where IT says fundamentally the opposite from what people say. So the example you mentioned, IIT in some sense can be argued to say that consciousness is not computable. There is no software running on a digital computer as currently conceived, a von Neumann machine, no matter how complex, assume it simulates the human brain, assume it simulates your brain. So it's software, let's say Python code, running in the cloud or supercomputer, wherever, and it mimics you. So of course it'll mimic everything you say because it actually models the brain. It models all the neurons and then models, Broca's area and, and it talks. And of course it'll say, of course I'll see. But IIT would say, no, it does. It's not a computation. It does not arise from mere computation being performed on a Turing machine. So this is the dominant paradigm of our day and age. It's called computational functionalism or machine functionalism. It is a metaphysical assumption that anything that has a function can be instantiated on a machine, like a Turing machine, like our computers are good models of Turing machines. The one you carry presumably in your pocket is a good example of a Turing machine. And so you can ask, are machines conscious today? And ChatGPT, we all know, right? It's quite intelligent. most people, or the people who are concerned themselves, would say, well, maybe not now, but it's just a question of, let's wait another, chat GPT 4.0 or 5.0 that they're working on, right? Soon it'll be conscious. And it's true. Soon these machines will have all the verbal utterances of a very intelligent human being. In fact, soon machines will be able to do anything you can do, anything any human can do, but they will never be what we are. They will never be conscious. And that's one of the clear conclusions that IIT comes through, that at least digital machine as currently conceived will never be conscious. Everyone wants to do psychedelics. Yes. In fact, if you just, sit in your in your airplane seat and you mentioned, I'm a neuroscientist working on psychedelics. Oh, that's interesting.
Now we're talking. Now we're talking. Now
yes,
you're
now we're
sitting
talking.
here. Yeah.
And got to remember, unlike in Holland, in our country, it's illegal.
Yeah. You really had to go to the jungle. Yeah.
My first mushroom experience, I knew what it's all about. I got to the beating heart of the universe. I finally understood it.
Yeah.
It remained ineffable, but I carried it still with me.
But that was your mushroom, but this DMT one went deeper.
5-MeO DMT.
Yeah, 5-MeO DMT, yeah.
Yeah, that's a terrifying experience. I'm never ever going to do again. It felt like a near-death experience.
Yeah.
So you lose.
Also, I guess because it's so instant, right? It's like in how many seconds?
3 breaths.
Unbelievable. Was there still a self to be terrified at that moment, or was you?
At that moment, my last thought was, holy shit, what have I done? But it was timeless. There's no time. Passage of time comes to us. So it's sometimes extraordinary. And the other extraordinary thing, 2 hours later, you're perfectly fine. I mean, I walked out of the house perfectly fine.
That's so crazy, the non-toxicity of it, right? Your brain just knows what to do with this molecule.
It's remarkable. So what it really brought home, once again, the centrality of consciousness, because at that moment there was nothing. There was no self, and there was no world. There was only consciousness. So it's really, consciousness is absolute. It's the only thing that truly exists for itself. Yeah. Not even self-conscious, because there was no more self. There was no Christof. So that really, number one, first and foremost, that the world, I don't know whether the world exists. In that case, there was no more world. Well, if a point of unbearable lightness, you can, I guess, still say it is part of a world, but it's pretty minimal. And so, of course, I was terrified. I woke up, I totally cried, because, I just lost everything.
Unbelievable, yeah.
So it was good in the sense of it. I discovered this a few weeks later, because up to then I had more often as I got older. I had these episodes where I lay awake in bed at night and I had death fear. You just think about death, being dead forever and ever and ever. It's terrifying, right?
Yeah.
And I discovered a few weeks later, I haven't had one of these since then. And this was now 4 years ago, and never had it again.
That's beautiful. Yeah, you write about a calmness that sort of has... Yeah. And so
it's a nice benefit.
Yeah.
And the trick is, I'm talking to many people and reading about it, you have to let go. You really have to let go. And the first time it happened was when I had this trick, I let go. And when you resist or you're afraid, you say, no, I don't want to do this now because of this, that, and the other. Yeah, so you have to become, think about it. Gravity, we all experience gravity every day, all the time. We're born into gravity, we will die in this gravitational well that's planet Earth, right? And a very rare condition, when you take one of these planes, you can, be weightless for a minute, or when you become an astronaut, you become weightless, but those are very rare. So it's same with self. We always are within the confines of the gravitational field of the self, right? There's always somewhat observing, and what does this mean for me, and what does it mean for my long-term well-being, etc., etc. And removing the self is very, very difficult. This always observant. And so that's a trick. You have to let go. Just let it be and just be part of the experience. As Schopenhauer said, no more distinction between the apprehender and the apprehended, between the knower and the knowing.
This is the central question that I've been wrestling with for the last 20 or so years, right? We don't know the answer to that question, but there are a number of explanations for the DMT experience. First of all, the kind of the orthodox explanation for this is, oh, it's your brain is just making it up. It's a wild cortical fabrication. But that's never made much sense to me, because we know that the brain wasn't dropped to earth ready to kind of construct worlds. The brain evolved to construct the normal waking world as a model of the environment. This is the world your brain knows, has learned, has evolved to construct. It knows how to construct one world model, right? So then you ask the question, well, how is it then possible that when you perturb the brain with this simple plant alkaloid, it suddenly becomes capable of constructing entirely coherent, inordinately complex, hyperdimensional worlds filled with seemingly hyper-intelligent beings? And that is, to me, remains a great mystery, unless somehow the brain is receiving information from somewhere else that's kind of constraining and modulating and informing its construction of this alternate world model. That is why it's such a problem, in my opinion, to explain DMT.
Everybody, when they do DMT, they always experience the same thing. They always experience these extreme geometrical patterns, and they all experience these so-called elves that are dancing around telling them things, like giving them positive messages that are transformative in some aspect or another. Is this pretty much consistent through everyone?
One of Stephen Szára's first subjects described these little dwarf-like beings that moved around very quickly. That's all we got. But to me, this is part of the characteristic of these DMT elves, these very sprightly, lively beings, often very cheerful, and they kind of welcome you into the space, and they love to show you things all the time. Look at this, look at this, look at this. The large gap between their intelligence and this is their world after all that we're kind of entering, if you like. So, and they like to kind of have fun, some of them. So there's a lot of kind of mocking going on sometimes, teasing,
right?
Kind of trickstery kind of behavior with these entities. They like to scare you. So you have to be kind of aware of that. But there's no evidence that they can actually do you any harm, other than giving you a bit of a scare. The fact that the brain can construct these realities, as I've said several times, is in itself confounding. It's remarkable. It suggests that there's some ability there that we weren't aware of. It suggests that I've often described this idea that we have this hyperdimensional heritage. It's a world that's not so much alien, but a world from which we have become alienated. DMT grants us this brief but astonishing glimpse at this remarkable hyperdimensional heritage. We've become alienated from that world. And this is also perhaps why when people take DMT, there is this profound sense of déjà vu and familiarity. Déjà vu, you really get this sense that this is the most fucking bizarre experience I couldn't possibly have imagined. And yet, at the same time, it is intensely familiar. I know this place. I've been here.
Really?
They welcome you back. The lights start flashing. The bells are ringing. There's your name literally in lights. He's returned. We haven't seen you for so long. Terence McKenna used to say, right? It was kind of like that. There's so many people describe that, of being welcomed home in a sense, like we've been away for so very long. again, if you take these intelligences seriously and you want to establish communication with them, you want to understand them, you want to know where they're from and what's the relationship between us and them, you have to stop treating DMT like a drug. Treat it like a technology. This technology is called Target Controlled Intravenous Infusion, TCIV, and it's well established as a technology that's been used for decades in anesthesiology. Okay. And my thought was, well, let's repurpose that. Let's replace the anesthetic drug with DMT. We can develop a mathematical model, the same pharmacokinetic model that's been used for anesthetics, but create it with using the data from DMT. We do take these entities seriously, and I think we need to. I don't think it's simple to explain their presence within the DMT state. I don't think it's simple. I don't think it's easy to simply explain them away as hallucinations or as archetypal structures from the collective unconscious. There seems to be something much more profound going on here. These beings, they have clear intent. When you go into the space, they're waiting for you. They get to work, right? They get to work on you. They're expecting you. They welcome you, and they have an agenda. They have an agenda, and it seems to be far more than your brain just making it up. Your brain doesn't really, in my opinion at least, doesn't seem to have this ability to model these hyper-complex, hyperdimensional realities filled with these beings that bear no relationship to anything in our world. So I think that we need to actually take seriously, and I say this as somebody who is something of a sober neuroscientist. I'm not one of these people who says, oh, it's the spirit world or it's the astral plane. I always avoid that because there's no explanation there for me. If you say, oh, you're going to the astral plane, I mean, well, what's the connection there? How does that work? What's the mechanics? So I'm looking for some kind of coherent explanation for what's going on. And I haven't found it in the orthodox paradigm of modern neuroscience at all. I've read the interpretations. I've read the explanations of the DMT state. It's hallucination. That doesn't make sense to me. These are far too complex. They're far too coherent to just be made up by the brain. But at the same time, I don't think that we can explain it in terms of archetypal structures as well. I think there's something completely non-human going on that has no relationship to either modern or ancestral humans. There's nothing in our evolutionary past, our historical past, that can explain why people are seeing these types of non-human, extremely advanced intelligences. So I think we have to start at least entertaining the idea that there's something far, far stranger going on. The entities, right?
Yeah.
So to answer your question about do people see the same things, everyone's experience is certainly different, but there are certain universal DMT motifs, if you like, that many people describe. The structure, the ambience of the space, the geometry, and also, of course, the beings within the space, the so-called DMT entities. And this goes back, I mean, of course, it goes back to these indigenous tribes in Amazonia who are using DMT. They used it to communicate with beings. They call them spirits or gods, right? We might have a different name for them now, but certainly it was clear that this is a characteristic feature of the DMT experience is the experience of other beings. And Stephen Szára, so you mentioned these elves, right? Terence McKenna, the elves, the machine elves, as Terence McKenna called them, they're by far the most famous denizens of these hyperdimensional realms. There's no doubt about that. And many people like to say, well, people see elves because McKenna saw elves and McKenna spoke about elves, so that's why you're seeing elves. And it's like, it's hard to get past that. So what we did actually a few years back is to go back to the original trip reports. Let's go back to the 1950s. Look at the trip reports there. Stephen Szára's very first study. Now, unfortunately, back then, they weren't that interested in the kind of the details of the trip report. This is not like Rick Strassman's study in the 90s, where he carefully had them, write down everything they experienced. So if they would say, "Oh, I saw hallucinations," but even within these old papers, you get these little snippets of trip reports that have that had back then the characteristic DMT flavors. They were describing this rapidly changing, rapid procession of complex geometric imagery. They were describing beings that they called gods, language of the time, or they would call them spirits. That was the lexicon of the time, if you like. You see some kind of non-human intelligence, and you refer to it as a spirit. Nowadays, we might call it something else. But one of Stephen Szára's first subjects described these little dwarf-like beings that moved around very quickly. That's all we got. But to me, this is part of the characteristic of these DMT elves, these very sprightly, lively beings, often very cheerful, and they kind of welcome you into the space, and they love to show you things all the time. Look at this, look at this, look at this. They were there in the first trip reports, and then through the 60s and on, with people like Timothy Leary describing elf-like beings and insectoid-like beings and reptilians, and there are certain types reptilians, man, and they can be ferocious. In Rick Strassman's study, one of the subjects described being how should we say, raped by reptilians.
What?
Yeah.
So there are bad beings in there?
Oh. Yeah, fortunately, before anyone has become totally kind of frightened by DMT, the vast majority of entity encounters are either positive or neutral. Often they will
The majority.
We're talking like 90%, yeah.
But what about that 10%? What's going on with those guys?
Well, I mean, they vary as much in their character as they do their form. We wouldn't predict that this was all beings of love and light. I mean, that's to be expected, right? The same on Earth. Not everyone's nice. Most people are nice,
right?
To some,
yes,
or kind of neutral. And this is the same in the DMT space.
Okay.
They often seem to be aware of their the large gap between their intelligence and this is their world, after all, that we're kind of entering, if you like. So, and they like to kind of have fun, some of them. So there's a lot of kind of mocking going on sometimes, and teasing, and
right,
kind of trickstery kind of behavior with these entities. They like to scare you. So you have to be kind of aware of that, but there's no evidence that they can actually do you any harm, other than giving you a bit of a scare.
All right, so I want to talk about some archetypes of entities that are commonly referred to. Let's talk about the elves or the machine elves. Small beings seem slightly mischievous, definitely not malevolent, certainly doesn't seem to be in the highly benevolent class either. So what is this? What is that phenomenon? And I want to talk about them, and I want to talk about the mantis beings, and then I want to talk about some of the more angelic beings that you might encounter. But let's start with the elves. What's going on here?
Well, the elves, I can probably start there. I mean, the elves, or gnomes, or pixies, or Terence McKenna used to call them tykes, as well as machine elves. They go back in pure DMT studies. They go back to Stephen Szára's first study. So Stephen Szára was this Hungarian physician who discovered the psychedelic effects of DMT. He synthesized it himself. He injected it into himself. This was the good old days when proper real scientists who injected drugs into themselves. And he discovered the psychedelic effects of DMT and immediately started recruiting mainly doctors and nurses from the hospital. And one of his first subjects actually reported this experience of seeing these very small beings, like dwarves, she described them, that were moving very, very quickly. That's all we got. But there was an indication there that even, this people often say that, oh, it's only because Terence McKenna talks about the elves that people see elves. And that's never made any sense to me whatsoever, because elf-like experiences, yes, he christened them the machine elves, but these diminutive, lively, mischievous beings, as you described them, they go back to the beginning. And in indigenous traditions as well, they often talk about the little people. One of the names of the chacruna plant, actually, by a different group, is oprito, which means little heavenly people, because the chacruna plant, which contains DMT, allows them to see the oprito, which is the little heavenly people. Users of the apina snuffs, these virola-based resin snuffs. When Richard Schultz was surveying or doing work in the Amazon back in the 1950s, one of his assistants said to him while he was looking at this virola tree, said to him, "Oh, this is the tree my father uses pellets from when he wants to see the little people." So these little people, they're not some idiosyncratic thing that's bubbling up out of Terence McKenna's mind, but they seem to be a universal feature of DMT-induced experiences. So where do they come from? We don't know. People have said that they are, this is the trickster or the jester archetype. To me, that's a very simplistic explanation. Archetypes provide kind of the broad brushstrokes for certain universal characters, but they don't capture the truly complex and dynamic and intelligent behavior of these beings, which certainly seem entirely non-human, and yet in a weird kind of way familiar. They're waiting for you. They welcome you into the space. They're the ones that are throwing the party, if you like. They're the ones ringing the bells and flashing the lights and kind of cheering, this great hurrah as you enter the space. He's back. Welcome back. So I think they're an integral part of this space, whatever they are, and they ought to be cherished, I guess, because they are kind of wonderful, I think.
All right, I got to talk to you about mantis beings. I'm imagining that, you guys have reports of this mantis class of beings as this kind of, I don't know, I guess neurosurgeon of the cosmos. That's at least what it was to me. How does that resonate with what you've seen from the field research about this class of beings?
Yeah, so I would say that the elves, these little diminutive jovial ones, they're extremely common, obviously, seem to be a fundamental feature of the state, but so do the mantis beings. And as you say, they are universally almost described as much more powerful, much more intelligent, seem to often described as like alien doctors or alien surgeons. They seem to be much more powerful, much more knowledgeable, and have an entirely different kind of intent to the elf-like being. The elf-like beings are all about showing you things, having fun, taking that opportunity when you're there to kind of show you what's possible when you let them do their thing, whether it's showing you Fabergé eggs of 9 dimensions or things like that, or singing impossible objects into existence, as Dennis McKenna used to describe it. But the mantis beings are of a completely different order. And that's fascinating, right? If you think about the way that we imagine, if you look at a mantis, just a regular mantis, it has that quality. It has this slightly, it's the closest insect to a human, and yet it seems entirely alien in a sense. If you wanted to imagine an alien being, a mantis would be a pretty good approximation. These big and these this triangular head and the massive eyes. It looks like if you're an insect or even a small bird, you're careful when you're around a mantis, right? And you've seen videos of them devouring things' head. These are brutal creatures. And when you meet them in this space, again, the mantis, they have that quality in that they are, incredibly intelligent and technologically sophisticated, and their purpose is not just to show you things, but to do things to you. Neurosurgery and incredibly sophisticated neuropsychosurgery, and that is reported again and again. Even people who have no familiarity with the law, so to speak, of DMT will very often find themselves in the land of the mantises. You are not guaranteed an audience with the great spirit of the forest. There is a very real possibility that you will encounter beings from the more objectionable end of the spectrum of entities, and the mantis beings certainly seem to have the potential to sit at that more horrifying and objectionable and I dare say sometimes quite malevolent end of that spectrum.
So what are your thoughts on the angels, star beings, and then this kind of archangel all the way up to the ascended master level, like Yeshua level encounters?
Well, I mean, I think there's no reason to think, and certainly the experiences bear this out, that there aren't levels of beings, just as there are on Earth. There are, from very, very small and what we would see as insignificant kind of creatures, or certainly less intelligent and powerful than us. And why wouldn't that continue onwards? And so if we enter this space that is clearly populated with this extremely diverse panoply of beings, then you would expect to see beings that are from the kind of the lower end. I don't mean that in a negative sense in any way, such as the elves, for example, or higher beings like the mantises, and then perhaps even much higher than that. And I think it's easy to be distracted by form. I don't think that the mantis beings in their true form are actually insectoid. I just think this is how they have to take on a form for us to experience in them. Our brain has to kind of construct a model of these beings, a representation of these beings. And sometimes they actually make that clear. There are reports of people who will say, "Are you really a fucking insect?" And they would say, "No, of course not. But we appear in this form to you because this is the form that makes sense to you." So I don't know whether the intelligence or intelligences or beings within this DMT space, whether it's an expression or a fragment or different perspectives, that you're seeing the same grand, vast intelligence that you, Aubrey, might call God, right? Whether these are just the million masks of God, as Chesterton called it, right? And we are one of the masks of God. And you are beautiful. Seeing one, you might see a number of these different perspectives, these different masks of God. But ultimately, it's all the same thing. You're just seeing different fragments, different angles, different shadings, different perspectives of the same being. And sometimes you can transcend form. The most common types of entity encounters actually are not elves, they're not mantises, but they are some kind of amorphous, undeniable presence of some great, vast, normally loving, guiding, protecting, nurturing intelligence that doesn't take on a form, but is there with you. So I think, we can.
And that's very much like the Mother Ayahuasca, right? Like, I mean, for me, I've encountered Mother Ayahuasca countless times. She's never appeared in form. It's a presence and a voice, actually. You've got it. Exactly. But I've never seen her. I can't tell you what she looks like. It's something far.
It doesn't matter in a way
beyond that. It doesn't matter.
Like. Yeah. So it's easy to get distracted by what did it look like? Well, actually, that's not so important. I think that's just kind of the interface by which we can interact with these intelligences.
I think one of the key things to think about is like tulpa. A tulpa is a Tibetan thought form. Like, you know, we may have imaginary friends when we're young. An egregore is multiple tulpas. So this is like your religions. So if I say Christ consciousness, it has so many connotations because it's its own thing. It's sentient. You know, we've given it sentience, you know, because we've had encounters, partly because, you know, we're picking up on it. But I think, you know, we are world builders. We have become gods in the sense that we, you know, we create these presences because we are multitudes. As Andrew says, we're, you know, why wouldn't there be such a cosmos of entities and things that protect us and things that maybe test us?
So the brain is kind of nudged away from this finely tuned and balanced level of order to a slightly more disordered state. And this matches the kind of subjective experience that you get with most psychedelics. The world starts to shift and change, and objects change and morph and change their identity before the eyes. Everything everything becomes more fluid, as well as your thinking. And this kind of matches this idea that psychedelics are kind of shifting the brain into this slightly disordered state. But what's interesting with DMT is that you seem to transcend that. So the brain goes into this slightly disordered state. It's kind of the initial phases of the experience, and then it kind of collapses into this entirely new order, as if you can imagine twisting the dial on one of these old radio sets, and at first it starts to crackle and becomes noisy, and then suddenly, when you kind of find a new channel, and you get this crisp, clear new channel, completely different to the one you left behind, and that's kind of what's happening with DMT. Is for some reason, and this is the great mystery, in my opinion, is the brain suddenly stops constructing its normal model of the environment that it's you know, learned and evolved to construct, and starts constructing this entirely unrelated world that is far more complex, far more dynamic, and yet completely coherent, and exquisitely detailed. You know, it's like the brain has suddenly switched to speaking a different language that it never learned to speak. We see ourselves as being at the top of the tree. We have control. We have dominion over the earth and dominion over reality. We understand the origins of the universe. You know, we understand all of this stuff and how everything works. And then DMT, within 30 seconds, obliterates. It's all gone. Our understanding nothing makes sense anymore. And I think that to get past that and look past that, it's like trying to peer into a black hole. Terence McKenna was foundational to my thinking about DMT, and to most people's. Most people hear about DMT and yours, you know.
Yes.
So it's like, and that's one of his most famous coinages, was this death by astonishment is the only risk with DMT. And so, yeah.
Somebody asked him, what are the risks of taking DMT or something like that?
Exactly. And he said the only danger is death by astonishment, which really encapsulates DMT, I think. I think most people cannot comprehend. Most people are never really astonished, you know, truly astonished. And DMT will deliver that every time.
It is truly astonishing. I mean, I've worked with it much less than you, but I've had the privilege of I don't know, maybe 20 DMT experiences over the years, and it remains utterly astonishing, and also slightly alarming. Maybe that's to do with sort of personal baggage that I carry. I don't know. I always feel slightly anxious before going into the DMT realm, and then have the security of knowing that I'll be out of it again pretty quickly. But once in there, I'm theirs. You know, it's seizes you in a way that nothing else I've ever experienced does.
Yeah, I mean, even Terence McKenna used to say that, used to describe the shaking hand around the pipe. I mean,
Yes.
it never goes away with me as well. I mean, certainly not. I mean, if you're not anxious before you do DMT, then I don't know, there's something not right up there, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And it is.
I agree. It ranks alongside, one of those great and slightly edgy and life adventures. I think.
What I hypothesized was that DMT is making the brain highly sensitive to being commandeered by this intelligent agent, to use the most neutral term for these intelligences. And this is what the data is showing. And Timmerman before also a very, very intriguing study where when a subject had their eyes closed and was injected with DMT, the pattern of neural activity was identical to vision. You could see the waves of activity flowing into the brain, even though the eyes were closed. And it was like, oh, where does this information come from? And of course, they would say, oh, it's just spontaneous neural activity. But
that comes down to a fundamental mystery that I think do not even begin to approach the answer to, which is in raw terms, is consciousness generated or manufactured by the brain, or is it perhaps received by the brain? And we get this interesting analogy. Rick Strassman has used it between the TV set and the TV signal. The signal can exist independently of the set, if you see what I mean.
Precisely. And yeah, I mean, that's the whole basis of my argument here. But I try to break it down and analyze and deconstruct and think deeply. I can't just say, oh, I don't believe that the brain can fabricate this, but I have to explain why I don't believe that. And that's a lot of the book. A chunk of the book is basically saying, no, these aren't hallucinations. These aren't dreams.
Very important chunk of the book.
Very important chunk of the book, I think.
It's so essential to come at this at this seemingly very wild and out there set of ideas, to come at it from a very grounded point of view.
A dozen people, but only Professor Carl Smith, who you also know.
I know Carl. Yeah.
You know Carl. He was the only one that managed. They had 5 sessions, I think, over several weeks, and he was the only one that completed all 5 sessions. I mean, that just kind of, and he's a serious psychonaut. I mean, this guy has some experience, to say the bloody least. So it just shows you how intense this experience is.
How much you have to brace yourself for it, and others didn't go through with the whole program.
Yeah, and what's kind of interesting is because it was 5 separate DMTX sessions. He was obviously going back into the DMT world each time, and he was meeting up with the same entities who were aware that he was returning, and eventually he got the sense that they were saying to him, "Oh, not you again," kind of feeling. So it's not just something that, it seems like it's not just an interaction that your brain is fabricating on the spot, but it seems to be this kind of longitudinal. It continues going on. These beings continue in their existence in your absence. Then you pop back in, and they're waiting for you. And they seem to be confused, he said, because when they did the scanning thing, the Imperial team did the scanning thing. With some fMRI or whatever, and the entities were apparently somewhat confused, because they're normally the ones that do the scanning, and whereas it was the Imperial team and the humans on the other side who were doing the scanning. So it just shows you that there seems to be this real potential for establishing some kind of relationship with particular types of entities, or even specific individual entities. It's hard to even imagine the transcendentally transformative implications of humanity recognizing that not only are we not alone, but that we're really not alone. That there are intelligences that are incomprehensibly more intelligent than us and more advanced, and that we can access them. Anyone can access them. This is not, you don't need advanced technologies to access these beings. Anyone who can source one of the many plant, abundant plant sources can access this intelligence. It's incredibly beautifully democratic in a way. You don't need permission. You don't need special equipment. All you need is a glass pipe, and you can access them. Once we accept that these intelligences are there, we learn how to spend time with them, spend significant portions of our lives interacting with these intelligences without assumptions as to what they are or where they're from or anything like that, and simply spend time and learn from them, what that learning might look like and how it might, the implications for our future development as an intelligent species, what that means. I don't think we know. And I think we're only going to find out by accepting that these are true intelligences and then learning from them.
Maybe it's been the source of all human inspiration down through the ages. Terence was right. Food of the gods. This is the fundamental idea that our ancestors got locked in a particular narrow track, and it was encounters with psychedelics that knocked us out of that track and opened us up to other things. So in a way, by demonizing these substances, our society is doing itself a disservice. And that's not to say don't be careful. I do say this every time. Anybody who wants to explore these medicines, be careful, do your research as you would with any serious matter. But fundamentally, this should be a matter of the sovereign decisions that individual adults make. Psychedelics are not for children, in my view, certainly not in our society.
And so Terence McKenna wasn't far off when he said that death by astonishment is perhaps the only risk, but that was a real warning. He wasn't joking in a sense. No. These aren't party drugs. This isn't a party drug, I should say. These are extremely bizarre, shocking, in many senses. For most people, first time will be horrifying, appalling. Just, you can't expect to go there and come back unchanged.
Absolutely.
It is going to change you fundamentally, particularly if you have specific views about the nature of reality or particular religious beliefs.
There are people who shouldn't take DMT, I suspect. Do you have any views on that? I don't want us to be irresponsibly saying everybody go take DMT. I think my first view on that is actually, if you are considering DMT, be extremely cautious and careful. Investigate this. Look into it in the same sort of depth that you might look into a first skydiving or a first deep scuba diving adventure. Look into it because there are risks, and if you're emotionally and mentally fragile, those and particularly, it has to be said, if you're on any kind of antidepressant, these substances are not necessarily helpful. The serotonin syndrome is something to look out for. And one thing I would counsel anybody, whether exploring DMT or any of the other tryptamines, is be off an antidepressant for at least 6 months before you go there.
Yeah, I mean, what is remarkable about DMT is, physiologically, assuming you are not on any other medications, or certain medications are an issue. As you mentioned, monoamine oxidase inhibitors are often used as antidepressants, and they can cause serious problems. But assuming you're not on any other kind of medications of that type, DMT has shown itself to be physiologically benign and in fact potentially even beneficial neurologically.
There's people that talk about the similarities of a DMT experience to this near-death experience. There was one guy in a video that I watched yesterday who was basically playing it out. He said he had a near-death experience when he was a kid, and he got in a car accident, and then he smoked DMT like 10 years later or something on a mountain, and he said he met the same exact entity and said, "You're not supposed to," he told him, he's like, "You're not supposed to be here." And have you ever experience or talked to people that have done both, smoked DMT and had an NDE?
We in the survey of over 4,000 people, we have scores that had a near-death experience and also described using psychotropic drugs. I mean, you name it, I've heard it: DMT, psilocybin, LSD, etc. So yeah, we have a fairly good-sized series of those. I think when you look at comparing DMT or other psychotropic drugs to near-death experiences, you have to be aware that there's a bit of a bias in the sense that YouTube videos will become popular and you'll access them because they get a lot of clicks and they're interesting. And so that's interesting. They had a near-death experience and it was similar to DMT. However, in the hundreds, probably over 100 for sure, of people that have had near-death experiences and shared with our research website and then discussed and compared the use of psychotropic brain-acting drugs to their near-death experience, the substantial majority say that they were grossly dissimilar. They may be slightly similar in the sense that it was unworldly.
Interesting.
They may have strong emotions associated with it. They may feel consciousnesses apart, but the great majority, and again, that's all these are posted NDEs. Anyone on the world can look them up and see this. They're predominantly very, very different. Above and beyond that, I co-authored a scholarly paper, Dr. Parnia, and as part of that, we looked at near-death experiences and what occurred in near-death experiences, and that was virtually all derived from my nderf.org website, what occurs during experiences. And as part of that scholarly article published in the Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences, we had a group of the co-investigators look at all the scholarly literature on the effects of psychotropic drugs. So this was actually a scholarly review of published effects of both near-death experiences and psychotropic drugs. And once again, the conclusion of this published peer-reviewed paper was that they're substantially different. And if anyone has any doubt about that,
where can we find that paper?
It's at the Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences about 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay.
But what anyone can do is go to the website erowid.org, EROWID, which is by far the largest collection of first-person experiences with psychotropic drugs by the scores. I mean, there's some I hadn't even heard of. But if you go there and look up DMT or psilocybin or some of the more popularly named substances that purportedly mimic near-death experiences, all you have to do is go there and then look up hundreds of first-person experiences, do exactly what I've done, go there, read 20 or 30 first-person accounts of psilocybin or DMT, and I think anybody can easily see quickly that the experiences are very different. These psychotropic drugs are far more likely to be hallucinatory. Events in these psychotropic drug experiences skip around like dreams, no surprise.
DMT is in the top left, Steve.
Yeah, and also, in addition to that, you may find that DMT or psilocybin are more likely to be frightening, and they're more likely to be recognized as hallucinatory as opposed to near-death experiences where virtually all that have a near-death experience understand that it's real. So in spite of what you may see on YouTube or other media sites, this is the reality based on peer-reviewed public literature and actual first-person experiences posted on the website, and then coupled with people that actually had near-death experiences and hallucinatory experiences, but they're really different.
What is the idea that in death, or before death, the pineal gland secretes DMT that basically allows that person to have a psychedelic experience that essentially allows them to die? Is that the theory of what the purpose of the pineal gland is?
I would, while that's a theory, I would have to say lots of people have had cardiac arrest, their heart stopped, and then they're resuscitated and they come back to life. I mean, thank goodness we have thousands, probably tens of thousands of people, even here in America, that have survived that horrific close brush with death. I would say almost uniformly they don't come back and describe a hallucinatory experience associated with their heart stopping. So I think, while we still need to study the effects of the pineal or other brain chemistry mediators, there doesn't seem to be any resuscitation of these people that come back and describe something that would be a hallucinatory experience due to the pineal or anything else.
But these people who their heart stops, they do have NDEs.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
When the heart stops, a cardiac arrest, that's one of the more common listed precipitating events of a near-death experience. Near-death experience, in my research, you have to be near death. In other words, so physically compromised that you're unconscious or clinically dead, like happens when your heart stops. So to understand how amazing it is that they have a near-death experience at that time, you have to understand the, if you will, the physiology of your heart stopping. Well, obviously, immediately when your heart stops, immediately blood stops flowing to the brain. 10 to 20 seconds after blood stops flowing to the brain, the EEG, electroencephalogram, which is a measure of brain cortical electrical activity, goes absolutely flat.
Really? After 20 seconds?
10 to 20 seconds. That's very well documented in the literature. So after 10 to 20 seconds after your heart stops, there's no measurable brain cortical activity, which is where your higher cognitive consciousness is. So it should be physically impossible to have a conscious experience at that time. And yet by the hundreds, people report near-death experiences after their heart stops far beyond that 10 to 20 second interval prior to anybody beginning CPR or efforts at resuscitation. So again, it's just yet another one of the stronger lines of evidence that after your heart stops and you have a near-death experience, absolutely medically inexplicable for that to be due to physical brain function.
How do we know that the brain stops 20 seconds after the heart stops? Like, how many people have we measured with an EEG on their head when their heart stops?
There's quite a bit of literature in the medical, various medical journals. I've actually cited that. These are big enough series that's generally accepted as being factual.
That just seems like a crazy thing to study, right?
Well, that's,
like, how would you be able to time that, to have an EEG on somebody and to be measuring their brain, knowing their heart's going to stop?
Well, it could be people, they're in the hospital, they're having some neurologic situation, they have an EEG on. Actually, interestingly, there was a very recent study by a Dr. Parnia called the AWARE-2 study, where they actually went out of their way to measure the EEG in people that, in a fairly good-sized series, that had a cardiac arrest. So that's by far the largest contemporary series of actual EEG measurements, and that was done prospectively. So that was published relatively recently, and they actually had targets placed, and they were hoping that people among these cardiac arrest patients would have a near-death experience and be able to spot a target with their consciousness apart from the body. Unfortunately, in this large study, basically only several people had a near-death experience, and they weren't actually in that group having their EEG being measured. But among those that had cardiac arrest that did have an EEG being measured, unfortunately none of them had a near-death experience. So it wasn't really conclusionary, but you did know that, again, like we knew from prior research, once you have a cardiac arrest, your measured brain cortical electrical activity is either flat or so disorganized that it should be absolutely impossible to have any lucid organized experience.
What is this, Steve? This is from PubMed?
This is the study he was talking about.
Oh, this is the study you referenced, an awareness during resuscitation, multi-center study of consciousness and awareness in cardiac arrest.
Right. He uses the term recalled experience of death.
All three of these compounds are monoamine oxidase inhibitors. That means that all three of them will contribute to synergizing DMT, which is present in the brew from the additional admixture. And the whole technology of ayahuasca is a technology of bringing these two plants together in correct ratios so that you strongly synergize visions, but not so strongly accentuate the unpleasant side effects of harming. As for what it is, it's very interesting. It is extraordinarily restorative. It is a purgative. What we know medically about it is that it is a strong purgative, that it kills intestinal parasites, and that it has possibly an adverse effect on the trypanosomal stage of the malaria organism. they did experiments at the University of California Medical Center in San Francisco where they were able to kill trypanosomes on Petri plates with small amounts of dilute ayahuasca. Well, if this were to stand up over time, you would see that this had then a very strong impact on people's adaptive, the cultural adaptive response to malaria in the Amazon. You would almost have to say that people who didn't take this stuff were at serious risk to be in these places because malaria is so all-pervasive. And a system of curing has grown up around this, a whole medical system that is now in great danger of being lost or forgotten or quackized in some way because people are getting into it but know very little about it. In the traditional situation, a long apprenticeship was required to be able to give this stuff to people and to be able to take it, and a diet. And what's interesting, there are many, many things that we could say about it that set it apart and make it interesting. It's running on, as I said, harmine and on dimethyltryptamine, DMT, to accentuate the visions. Well, these two compounds are both endogenous hallucinogens. That means both of these compounds occur in the human body under ordinary circumstances, in the human brain. So, in a way, what we have with ayahuasca is not a kind of folk pharmaceutical intervention in illness or neurosis, but actually a brain cocktail, a shifting of ratios, and accentuating and a saturating with compounds already a part of normal metabolism. Well, in spite of the fact that these things are constituents of normal metabolism, the way this presents itself is as a profound visionary experience. So that and it's fairly brief. It lasts about 4 hours, and then there's a long gliding integration, and there is never a particular energy loss. In a way, you seem to have taken one small step which you are not asked to retract. There is no energy debt. This is very interesting and is a hint that the right strategy with these shamanic hallucinogens is this effort to see them as intervention into ordinary brain chemistry that is shifting ratios but not adding new factors into the mix. And I don't know how many of you have been here for all of these lectures, but in many of the lectures we've touched on the unique ability of ayahuasca to promote synergy, synesthesias, situations where music is beheld, specifically the self-generated music of these tribal groups, that these songs that are being sung are to be appreciated pictorially. They are sculptural constructs in an idiom of sound that is intended to be beheld. So, and this is something that we have no cultural lock on. We have nothing comparable to this. When the people like Koch Grunberg and the early people into the Amazon began naming the suspected active agent in ayahuasca, they called it telepathy. because they believed that group states of mind were being generated in these tribal groups. And in fact, this is not that far off the mark. I mean, a kind of pedestrian notion of telepathy is, I think you hear what I think. But notice that even though thinking is not an audial function, the cultural assumption is that thought would be heard. There's no reason for this. I mean, thought could be felt or it could be seen. And this, in fact, appears to be what is happening. DMT, this domain of compounds that I'm interested in, that I keep restricting our attention to, these indole-tryptamine hallucinogens, it's because they are so much like brain chemistry and they act so directly on the language-forming centers. DMT can trigger spontaneous glossolalia, the shift in neural processing that takes place in the presence of ayahuasca causes songs to be beheld. What we're moving here in is the realm of signal processing, perception, and language generation. This is where these things are particularly targeting, and in different ways. For instance, I talked about how the mushroom speaks. Psilocybin, 5-hydroxy and then dimethyltryptamine. Again, just a gnat's eyelash away from these other compounds. It speaks. Another causes music to be visible, so forth and so on. Another triggers glossolalia. So for me, what is interesting about the ayahuasca phenomenon is the idea that what is happening here is a kind of recreation in the new world of this symbiosis with a plant that I suspect lay behind our prehistoric condition. That in the past, before history, during the melting of the last glaciers and before, 15 to 25,000 or more years ago, a whole different kind of mental life was available to human beings. And it was not a diminished or brutish mental life. It was a tremendously rich, integrated kind of mental existence that lay beyond the contradictions of dualism and class structure and division of labor and all of these things that we associate with our fall into history. Well, isn't it interesting then that as soon as these consciousness synergizing hallucinogens turn up in the symbiotic relationship between ancient human beings and cattle, that what abruptly begins to happen is accelerated technological innovation. So that by 20,000 BP, a bone antler technology is beginning to appear. After 1.5 million years of chipping stone, suddenly there is interest in bone, antler, beadwork, drills. All kinds of things are appearing that were previously extremely rare or completely unknown. If this extraterrestrial scenario were found to be true, then it would explain to some degree this self-replicating informational engine that we have turned our species into, in complete contravention to the ordinary laws that operate evolutionarily on ordinary species, that we have become something else.